The morning light, filtered through the sleek, minimalist blinds of her corner office, painted stripes across the polished concrete floor. Lee Ji-hai, CEO and guiding force of Mirai Innovations, sat at her unassuming desk, a cup of green tea steaming beside a meticulously organized stack of documents. Her movements were precise, her gaze sharp, yet there was a quiet grace to her presence that belied the formidable intellect simmering beneath. She was an architect, not just of technology, but of culture, a corporate landscape where excellence was not just expected but cultivated, where respect was the unspoken currency, and where dedication forged the very foundations of success. Mirai Innovations, a name she had personally chosen, meaning future in Korean, was more than just a company. It was a testament to Ji-hai's unwavering vision. From its humble beginnings as a small tech startup, she co-founded with sheer grit and a brilliant algorithm, it had blossomed into a respected leader in the competitive Seoul market. Its headquarters, a modern edifice of glass and steel nestled in the bustling Gangnam district, hummed with a quiet energy. Employees moved with purpose, their faces reflecting a blend of focus and camaraderie. This wasn't a place of cutthroat competition, but one of collaborative ambition, carefully nurtured by Ji-hai's philosophy that true innovation stemmed from a foundation of mutual trust and diligent effort. Ji-hai herself was a study in controlled power. Her dark hair, often pulled back in a severe yet elegant chignon, framed a face that was both beautiful and unyielding. She favored tailored suits in muted tones, projecting an image of professionalism that was both approachable and undeniably authoritative. Yet, it was in the subtle nuances of her leadership that her true genius lay. She possessed an almost uncanny ability to observe, to read the unspoken anxieties in a junior developer's twitching fingers or the hidden triumphs in a marketing manager's slight smile. Nothing truly escaped her notice, a trait honed over years of navigating treacherous business waters and building an empire from the ground up. Her day began before most, often with a solitary walk through the silent, pre-dawn streets of Seoul, clearing her mind for the relentless demands ahead. By the time her executive assistant, Park So-young, arrived, Ji-hai had already reviewed the previous day's market analyses and outlined the key strategic points for the upcoming week. "Good morning, So-young," she'd greet, her voice calm and even, a subtle warmth in her eyes that was reserved for those she trusted implicitly. "Let's review the quarterly projections before the team meeting. I'm particularly interested in the Busan expansion data." Integrity was the bedrock of Mirai. Ji-hai had, on more than one occasion, turned down lucrative deals that skirted ethical lines, explaining to her bewildered board members that short-term gain at the cost of our reputation is no gain at all. This unwavering commitment had earned her fierce loyalty from her senior management team and a deep, if sometimes intimidating, respect from every employee. They knew their CEO was not just brilliant, but incorruptible. She believed in meritocracy, in rewarding hard work, and in fostering an environment where every individual, regardless of their position, was valued for their contribution. Walking through the open-plan offices, Ji-hai often paused, not to micromanage, but to simply absorb the atmosphere. She'd offer a quiet word of encouragement to a programmer wrestling with a complex code, or share a brief, knowing smile with a design team brainstorming new UI concepts. Her presence was a subtle anchor, a reminder of the high standards she upheld. She knew the names of most of her 300-plus employees, a small detail that spoke volumes about her dedication to the human element of her business. She understood that a company was not just a collection of assets and projects, but a living, breathing organism powered by the people within it. Her keen observational skills extended beyond mere pleasantries. She noticed the slight slump in a project manager's shoulders after a particularly tough client call, the subtle shift in team dynamics when a new member joined, or the nascent signs of discontent when an internal policy wasn't landing well. These were not just observations, they were data points, processed by her sharp mind, informing her decisions, and allowing her to course-correct before minor issues escalated. She had an almost parental instinct for her company, believing that nurturing its health and well-being was her primary responsibility. Ji-hai understood the delicate balance of power and empathy required for effective leadership. She was firm when necessary, her decisions decisive and clear, yet always underpinned by a deep-seated fairness. She expected nothing less than absolute dedication and respect for the company's mission and for each other. This was the world Li Ji-hai had painstakingly built, a world of quiet competence, unwavering integrity, and relentless pursuit of excellence. It was a world that, she believed, was too precious to be disturbed by anything less than the same dedication and respect it demanded from its leader and every single member of its team. This strong foundation, however, was about to be tested, subtly at first, by a ripple of arrogance beginning to spread through the quiet hum of Mirai. Innovations. Within the meticulously cultivated ecosystem of Mirai Innovations, Kim Min-jun had long been a somewhat unremarkable fixture. He was a mid-level project coordinator in the marketing department, competent enough to handle his daily tasks, but never one to push the boundaries of innovation or leadership. His performance reviews were consistently satisfactory, a polite corporate euphemism for meets expectations but rarely exceeds them. He was, in essence, a cog in the well-oiled machine, contributing reliably, if without particular distinction. His colleagues regarded him with polite indifference. He was just Min-jun. However, in the months following his recent marriage, a subtle, yet increasingly palpable shift began to alter Min-jun's demeanor. It started innocently enough. A slightly more expensive watch, a new designer tie that seemed a touch out of place for Mirai's understated professional dress code. Then came the changes in his daily habits. He began arriving a few minutes later, occasionally pushing the boundaries of the official start time, his walk into the office less hurried, more of a saunter. His usual quiet nods to colleagues morphed into dismissive waves, or worse, an air of aloof superiority. Whispers began to circulate around the coffee machine and in the hushed tones of the break room. "Did you see Min-jun's new car?" one junior analyst, Choi Yun-ju, murmured to a colleague. "It's one of those imported luxury sedans." Her colleague, Park, Jin-ho, simply raised an eyebrow. "He must have married well. I heard his wife is from a very wealthy family." The narrative solidified quickly. Min-jun's sudden affluence and inflated ego were attributed entirely to his new spouse, a woman whose family reportedly owned significant real estate holdings in Bundang. This newfound status, however, did not translate into improved work performance. Quite the opposite. Min-jun's attention to detail, once merely adequate, plummeted. He grew increasingly complacent, delegating tasks he once handled himself to junior staff with an imperious flick of the wrist. Emails went unanswered for hours, sometimes days, and his contributions in team meetings became punctuated by self-important pronouncements rather than constructive ideas. He often spoke of "my wife's connections" or "my new investments" in casual office chatter, subtly implying his impending departure from the corporate grind, as if Mirai Innovations was merely a temporary diversion. His colleagues, initially amused or perhaps a little envious, soon found his behavior grating. Team lead, Kang Dae-hyun, a pragmatic man who valued efficiency above all, found himself constantly having to follow up on Min-jun's assignments. "Min-jun, the client report for Project Orion needs your final review by end of day," Dae-hyun would remind him. Min-jun, lounging back in his ergonomic chair, would wave a dismissive hand. "Ah, yes, Orion. I'll get to it. Honestly, these minor projects are hardly worth my time these days. My wife was just telling me about her father's latest venture. Now that's business." Dae-hyun would grit his teeth, the unspoken frustration hanging heavy in the air. Ms. Li Ji-hai, in her corner office, observed these subtle shifts with a quiet analytical concern. Her finely tuned senses, accustomed to detecting the slightest discord in her corporate symphony, registered Min-jun's growing dissonance. She didn't confront him, not yet. Her approach was always strategic, her judgments formed not on hearsay but on objective patterns of behavior. From her vantage point, she saw the tardiness, noted the casual dismissiveness and processed the increasingly sloppy quality of his team's output, which inevitably reflected on him as the coordinator. She had a subtle monitoring system in place, a dashboard of key performance indicators for every department, and Min-jun's team's metrics, once stable, showed a worrying dip. She would occasionally pass him in the hallway. Min-jun, once deferential, now offered a quick, almost perfunctory nod, his eyes already scanning past her, as if she were merely another obstacle in his path. This lack of genuine acknowledgement was a stark contrast to the deferential respect she usually received, a sign that his hubris was growing unchecked. Ji-hai, ever composed, would offer a polite, if cool, greeting, her mind cataloguing yet another data point in Min-jun's escalating arrogance. Her concern wasn't personal, it was institutional. Mirai Innovations thrived on a culture of respect and dedication. One employee, no matter how minor, displaying such blatant disregard for professional standards and colleagues, could be a corrosive influence. It was like a small, almost imperceptible crack appearing in a meticulously crafted ceramic vase. Left unaddressed, it could spread, weakening the entire structure. Ji-hai understood that leadership wasn't just about celebrating successes, it was about swiftly and decisively addressing issues that threatened the core values of the company. She reflected on the stories she'd heard about his wife's family. Wealth, she knew, could be a powerful enabler, but it could also be a dangerous intoxicant, particularly for those unaccustomed to its influence. She had seen too many promising careers derailed by personal distractions or an inflated sense of self-importance. Min-jun was not a particularly vital asset to Mirai, but his rapidly deteriorating attitude was becoming a liability. It challenged the very ethos she had so carefully instilled, that hard work, humility, and unwavering commitment were the true architects of success, far more potent and enduring than any inherited fortune. The tide of Min-jun's arrogance was rising, and Ms. Lee knew with a quiet certainty that a storm was brewing on the horizon. The executive lounge on the top floor of Mirai Innovations was designed as an oasis of calm. Plush leather sofas, a muted color palette, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Han River created an atmosphere of understated luxury. A discreet Nespresso machine purred softly in one corner, and a small library of business journals lined a wall. It was a place for senior managers and executives to unwind, to hold impromptu, quiet discussions, or simply to gather their thoughts away from the hum of the open-plan offices below. On this particular afternoon, Lee Ji-hai sought refuge there. A demanding board meeting had just concluded, leaving her mentally drained but professionally resolute. She poured herself a cup of calming herbal tea, the warmth seeping into her hands, and retreated to a secluded nook near the far window. A tall, intricately carved wooden screen, a gift from a visiting Japanese delegation, offered a measure of privacy, shielding her from the main seating area. She settled onto a comfortable armchair, documents from the meeting still clutched in her hand, and closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing the quiet solace of the lounge to wash over her. The tranquility, however, was about to be shattered. A moment later, two voices, boisterous and unapologetically loud, intruded upon the quiet. Ji-hai recognized one instantly, Kim Min-jun. The other, a younger, more impressionable voice, likely a junior manager, perhaps Lee Jin-woo from the sales team, responded with nervous laughter. Ji-hai instinctively froze, not wanting to reveal her presence and inadvertently interrupt their conversation. She simply wanted a few more moments of peace. The screen, she realized, was more effective at concealing her than she had initially thought, her presence completely obscured from their view. Min-jun's voice, amplified by his own self-importance, carried clearly. "Honestly, Jin-woo, I don't know why I even bother with these petty projects anymore," he began, a dismissive wave audible in his tone. "My wife, Do-yeon, was just telling me over breakfast about her father's latest real estate acquisition in Jeju. We're talking billions, not these pathetic few millions we chase here." A snort of derision followed, a sound that made Ji-hai's grip tighten imperceptibly on her teacup. Jin-woo offered a weak, placating chuckle. "Ah, yes, your wife's family is very influential, Minjun-si." He sounded uncomfortable, clearly attempting to steer the conversation into safer waters. But Minjun was too engrossed in his own grandiosity to notice. "Influential? That's an understatement, my friend. We're talking old money, real power. You know, the kind that makes these corporate games feel like child's play. I mean, what am I even doing here? Chasing deadlines, appeasing clients. For what? A meager salary that wouldn't even cover my wife's monthly shopping bill." He laughed again, a harsh, grating sound that grated on Ji-hai's nerves. "Do Yon actually suggested I just quit. Said she'd set me up with something proper, something worthy of my talents. But I figured, why not keep it for a bit? Good for appearances, you know. Makes it look like I'm still working hard." He practically spat out the words "working hard" with contempt. Ji-hai felt a cold knot form in her stomach. It wasn't just the blatant disrespect for his job, or the casual dismissal of Mirai Innovations, the company she had poured her life into. It was the arrogance, the sheer audacity of his pronouncements, echoing through the very halls of the institution he so cavalierly denigrated. Her initial shock began to morph into something deeper, a quiet fury that simmered just beneath her composed exterior. Then came the words that struck like a poisoned dart, piercing through her carefully constructed composure. "And honestly," Minjun continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, yet still perfectly audible to Ji-hai, "my boss, she's so pitiful, always so serious, so focused on every little detail. Doesn't she have a life? Doesn't she know? There's more to existence than these spreadsheets and meetings. She probably thinks this company is her whole world. So naive, so utterly pathetic." His tone was laced with a venomous disdain, a dismissiveness that was profoundly insulting. "I mean, who cares about her grand vision? It's just a job, a stepping stone. For people like her, maybe it's the pinnacle, but for me, please, just a temporary amusement until something better comes along, courtesy of my wife's generosity." Ji-hai's breath hitched. Her blood ran cold. The herbal tea, once comforting, now felt scalding in her hands. The image of Minjun's sneering face, though unseen, burned in her mind. Pitiful, pathetic, naive. The words echoed, each one a hammer blow to her sense of professional pride, to the integrity she lived and breathed. For a terrifying moment, she felt a primal urge to rise, to step out from behind the screen, and confront him then and there. To watch his face drain of color, to see the arrogance crumble into terrified realization. But Ji-hai, the architect of her own destiny, the woman who had built an empire on calculated decisions, did not move. She remained utterly still, her body rigid, her mind reeling. Her eyes, open now, stared blankly at the cityscape beyond the window, seeing nothing but the unfolding betrayal. The initial shock gave way to a cold, hard clarity. This wasn't just an employee complaining. This was a fundamental challenge to everything she stood for, everything Mirai Innovations represented. And she, the pitiful boss, had heard every single word. The silence that descended upon the executive lounge after Minjun and Jin-woo finally departed was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. Ji-hai remained hidden behind the wooden screen, rigid, her mind a whirlwind of raw emotion. The clatter of the teacup, now cold in her trembling hands, against its saucer, was the only sound in the vast, empty space. For long moments, she simply sat, processing the shock, the insult, the profound disrespect. First came the anger, hot and visceral. It flared within her, a burning ember of personal affront. Pitiful, pathetic, naive. The words replayed, each one a fresh stab. How dare he? How dare he speak of her life's work, with such contemptuous disregard? She who had poured her heart and soul every waking moment into building Mirai Innovations from a fledgling idea into a thriving enterprise. She who had sacrificed personal comfort and countless hours to ensure every employee, including Minjun, had a stable, respectable career. The injustice of his casual cruelty was a bitter pill. Her first impulsive thought was to summon him immediately, to march him into her office, to lay bare her knowledge. to strip him of his pretense and expose his arrogance, to watch him squirm under the weight of his own hubris. A wave of satisfaction, dark and tempting, washed over her at the thought of such an immediate, devastating confrontation. But then, the initial surge of emotion began to recede, replaced by the familiar cold clarity of her strategic mind. Ji-hai took a deep, shuddering breath, forcing herself to separate the personal from the professional. This was not just about her feelings, though they burned fiercely. This was about Mirai Innovations. This was about the integrity of the company she had built, the values she had painstakingly instilled. Min-jun's words were not merely an insult to her, they were a direct assault on the very foundations of respect, dedication, and professionalism that defined Mirai. She rose slowly, her movements stiff, and walked to the window, gazing out at the sprawling cityscape. The bustling life below seemed distant, abstract. Her anger, though still present, began to transform, shifting from a fiery blaze to a cold, sharp edge. She realized that an immediate emotional confrontation, while personally gratifying, would be short-sighted. It would be impulsive, reactive, and ultimately less effective. It would make her seem petty, driven by personal revenge rather than a leader upholding company standards. No, this required a different approach, a calculated one. Her initial impulse to lash out gave way to a chilling resolve. Min-jun had not just slandered his boss, he had openly declared his contempt for his job, his colleagues, and the very concept of hard work and loyalty. Such blatant disrespect, such profound hubris, could not be left unaddressed. Not for personal retribution, but for the health and moral fabric of Mirai Innovations. She began to think of the broader implications. If Min-jun felt this way, how many others might harbor similar, though perhaps less vocal, contempt? If his behavior went unchecked, what message would it send to the diligent, hard-working employees who genuinely valued their contributions? It would undermine morale, erode trust, and eventually chip away at the very excellence that set Mirai apart. She envisioned her carefully. Constructed corporate world, now subtly infected by Min-jun's cancerous arrogance, spreading and corrupting the healthy cells around it. Ji-hai's mind, a finely tuned machine, began to plot. She wouldn't confront him about his boastful words directly. That would be too easy, too messy, too personal. Instead, she would allow his own arrogance, his own lack of ethics, to weave the rope that would inevitably hang him. She would create a stage, not for a dramatic confrontation, but for an undeniable, irrefutable demonstration of his own professional failings. He had scoffed at her pitiful focus on details. Well, those very details would become his undoing. Her resolve hardened, turning her initial anger into a steel-like determination. This wasn't about revenge, she told herself, though a part of her acknowledged the deep satisfaction that would come from seeing justice served. This was about accountability. This was about safeguarding the integrity of Mirai. This was about sending an unequivocal message. In her company, competence, dedication, and respect were non-negotiable. Min-jun had dramatically underestimated his pitiful boss, and in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. The game had changed, and Lee Ji-hee, the unseen architect, was now quietly, meticulously preparing to dismantle the structure of his arrogance, brick by arrogant brick. From that day forward, Lee Ji-hai viewed Kim Min-jun through an entirely new lens. Her gaze, once impartial, was now a finely tuned instrument of strategic observation. Every interaction, every email, every subtle shift in his demeanor was catalogued, analyzed, and filed away in the meticulous archives of her mind. She maintained her outward composure, interacting with him, when necessary, with the same cool professionalism she extended to all employees. There was no hint of her hidden knowledge, no tremor in her voice, no telltale flicker in her eyes. She was the calm before the storm, and Min-jun, oblivious in his bubble of self-importance, sailed blindly onward. Her first step was to discreetly gather data. She summoned Park So-young, her trusted executive assistant, a woman whose loyalty and discretion were absolute. "So-young," Ji-hai began, her voice even, I'm conducting a comprehensive review of our departmental efficiencies, particularly in marketing. Could you compile a detailed performance report for Min-jun's team over the last 6 months? I need data on project completion rates, client feedback, budget adherence, and any notable incidents or deviations from protocol. So Young, accustomed to her CEO's thoroughness, simply nodded, making precise notes. Also, Ji-hai added, almost as an afterthought, I understand Min-jun-si recently married. For our updated employee database, we need to ensure all personal details are current. Could you arrange for a discreet standard background check on his new spouse, specifically confirming her family's business affiliations and the nature of their primary assets, just for our records to ensure there are no potential conflicts of interest, given his recent elevated demeanor? So, Young's eyes, ever perceptive, lingered on her CEO for a fraction of a second longer than usual, sensing the unspoken weight behind the request, but she simply confirmed, Understood, President Lee. I will handle it with the utmost discretion. Ji-hai knew that Min-jun's boasting about his wife's wealth was central to his arrogance. Understanding the true nature of that wealth, its stability and his actual access to it, was a crucial piece of the puzzle. It would either validate his newfound swagger or expose it as a hollow facade. Her strategy was not just about his performance at Mirai, but about dismantling the entire edifice of his inflated self-worth. As the weeks progressed, the patterns in Min-jun's work became glaringly obvious. His tardiness, once a minor annoyance, became more frequent and prolonged. He'd saunter in often a good 15 to 20 minutes past the official start time, his expensive watch gleaming, a casual apology, if any, tossed over his shoulder. He spent an increasing amount of time on his phone, ostensibly for personal business, but often seen scrolling through luxury car websites or real estate listings during working hours. His reports, once merely adequate, now betrayed a shocking lack of thoroughness. Client presentations contained factual inaccuracies that required last-minute corrections by his long-suffering junior team members. Deadlines were routinely missed, not because of unforeseen circumstances, but because of Min-jun's casual disregard. He would delegate complex tasks to inexperienced staff, offering minimal guidance, then claim credit for any successes while deflecting blame for failures. Ji-hai observed him in meetings. Where he once contributed, however modestly, he now either remained silent, radiating an air of bored superiority, or interjected with tangential comments about his connections or the real world of high finance, completely unrelated to the topic at hand. When challenged on a point, his responses were dismissive, often laced with thinly veiled condescension for anyone who dared to question his enlightened perspective. I wouldn't expect you to understand, Dae-hyun-si, he once said to the team lead, a man with 20 years of industry experience. These are concepts from a different league. The silence that followed was thick with suppressed indignation. She noticed his interactions with junior staff. He would bark orders, make unreasonable demands, and then disappear, leaving them to scramble to pick up the pieces. He rarely offered praise, but was quick to criticize, often publicly, further eroding team morale. Employees who once tolerated him now actively avoided him, their faces hardening whenever he approached. The subtle camaraderie that characterized Mirai was slowly being poisoned by his pervasive arrogance. So Young's discreet inquiries slowly yielded results. The background check confirmed the significant wealth of his wife's family, the Huang Group, but also highlighted certain nuances. Their assets were primarily in long-term real estate and traditional manufacturing, not the agile high-tech world of Mirai. More importantly, it became clear that Min-jun himself had no direct access to this wealth. His wife, Hwang Do-yeon, while financially secure, maintained strict control over her personal finances, as did her family. Min-jun's lavish lifestyle appeared to be entirely dependent on her goodwill, a fragile arrangement that could be rescinded at any moment. This information solidified Ji-hai's resolve. Min-jun's arrogance wasn't just unprofessional. It was built on a foundation of borrowed grandeur, a house of cards that could collapse with a whisper. He wasn't truly rich, he was merely a beneficiary, and a precarious one at that. He had traded his professional integrity for an illusion, and that illusion was now corroding his professional conduct. The web was being woven, thread by thread, of his own making. Ji-hai, the unseen spinner, watched, patiently waiting for the moment when the threads would tighten around him. Li Ji-hai wasn't one to rush a process. Her strategy was akin to a master chess player, making moves that seemed innocuous on the surface, but were designed to slowly, inexorably, corner her opponent. With the background information on Minjun's precarious financial reality now confirming her suspicions, she began to subtly apply pressure, placing him in situations designed to expose his true character and commitment. These weren't overt traps. They were simply projects requiring the diligence and responsibility that a professional in his position should inherently possess. Her first move was to assign Minjun a critical role in the upcoming client presentation for Project Nova, a high-stakes artificial intelligence development. This project was vital, involving one of Mirai's most prestigious international partners, Global Tech. Minjun-si, she stated calmly during a departmental meeting, her eyes coolly assessing him, given your experience in client relations, I'd like you to personally oversee the final data synthesis for the Nova presentation. Ensure all figures are meticulously cross-referenced and that the projected ROI is clearly articulated and backed by robust analytics. This presentation is crucial. Minjun, ever the showman, puffed out his chest. He saw it as a grand opportunity, a chance to bask in the glow of a high-profile project without necessarily doing the heavy lifting. Of course, President Li, he responded, a confident smirk playing on his lips. Consider it handled. My unique perspective will ensure its success. Ji-hai knew precisely what his unique perspective entailed: shortcuts. She anticipated he would delegate the bulk of the work to junior analysts, provide minimal oversight, and then attempt to take credit. And she was right. Minjun, instead of immersing himself in the complex data, spent most of his time refining his personal presentation style, focusing on superficial flourishes rather than substantive content. He tasked a young, inexperienced analyst, Kim Da-yoon, with the daunting task of verifying thousands of data points, offering vague instructions, and disappearing for long lunches with important contacts. The cracks began to show almost immediately. Da-yoon, overwhelmed and lacking proper guidance, struggled to meet the demanding deadline. When she approached Minjun with concerns about discrepancies in the early projections, he waved her off dismissively. Don't worry about the small stuff, Da-yoon-si. The big picture is what matters. Trust me, I know how these things work. Just make it look good. His ego blinded him, convincing him that charm and a veneer of confidence could paper over any underlying flaws. Just days before the presentation, Dae-hyun, Minjun's team lead, discovered a significant error in the projected ROI figures that Da-yoon, under Minjun's lax supervision, had overlooked. It was a miscalculation that, if presented to Global Tech, could severely damage Mirai's credibility. Dae-hyun confronted Minjun, his voice tight with frustration. Minjun, this is a serious mistake. The numbers are off by nearly 15%. This could jeopardize the entire deal. Minjun, initially flustered, quickly recovered. His arrogant facade. A minor oversight, Dae-hyun, easily fixable. These things happen. Why are you making such a fuss? We're all human. He then attempted to shift the blame, muttering about Da-yoon's inexperience, completely absolving himself of responsibility. Ji-hae, receiving a discreet report from Dae-hyun, noted the incident. She did not intervene directly, allowing Dae-hyun to scramble and correct the error, albeit with immense stress. The presentation ultimately went well, largely due to Dae-hyun's frantic last-minute efforts, but Ji-hae observed Minjun's smug demeanor during the success celebration, accepting accolades he hadn't earned. The incident was a vivid confirmation of his professional deterioration. Another test came in the form of a detailed market analysis report for a new product launch. This report required meticulous research, competitive benchmarking, and a nuanced understanding of consumer trends. Minjun-si, Ji-hee instructed in a follow-up email, copied to Dae-hyun, I expect a comprehensive, data-driven report, personally reviewed and signed off by you. Attention to detail is paramount for this launch." This was a direct challenge to his sloppiness. Min Jun, still riding high from the Nova presentation's success, in his mind, treated the new assignment with contempt. He viewed it as beneath him, a tedious chore. He outsourced much of the research to an external agency, barely reviewing their findings, and then simply slapped his name on the final document. The report, when submitted, was generic, lacking original insights, and contained several outdated statistics. It was a superficial effort, a mere formality in his eyes. Ji Hai, reading through the report, noted every flaw: the lack of depth, the recycled data, the absence of his unique perspective, unless unique meant uninspired. She could practically hear his disdain for the task echoing in the report's bland paragraphs. She didn't send it back, nor did she comment on it. Immediately, she simply filed it away, another piece of undeniable evidence. Each test, each project, served to peel back another layer of his professional facade, revealing the increasingly hollow core beneath. The cracks were no longer subtle. They were beginning to show, wide and undeniable to anyone who cared to look. And Ji Hai was looking very, very closely. The time for subtle tests was over. Li Ji Hai knew that to truly expose Min Jun's hubris and demonstrate its corrosive effect, she needed to engineer a situation where his failure would be both undeniable and impactful. It had to be a project of significant consequence, one that his arrogance would compel him to accept, yet his incompetence would ensure his downfall. This was not about personal vindictiveness. It was about surgical precision, a strategic move to safeguard Mirai's integrity. She began by identifying the perfect opportunity, the upcoming Mirai Vision 2025 initiative. This was a flagship project, a strategic blueprint for the company's expansion into new markets, requiring meticulous planning, robust financial modeling, and securing key partnerships. Its success was paramount for the company's future trajectory. It was prestigious, high-profile, and critically, incredibly complex, demanding absolute diligence and attention to detail at every stage. Ji Hai, in a carefully orchestrated executive meeting, proposed a new, streamlined leadership structure for Vision 2025. To ensure maximum efficiency and accountability, she announced, her voice calm and authoritative, we will designate a single project lead for the market entry strategy phase. This individual will be responsible for all external communications, partnership negotiations, and the final presentation to our board of investors. She paused, letting the weight of the announcement settle. Given his recent engagement with high-profile projects and his purported connections, I believe Kim Min Jun is uniquely positioned to take on this challenging role. A ripple of surprise, quickly masked, passed through the room. Dae Hyun, Min Jun's team lead, looked visibly uneasy, but Ji Hai's gaze brooked no dissent. Min Jun, present at the meeting, practically swelled with pride. He saw it as vindication, proof that his superior status was finally being recognized. He believed his connections and unique perspective would effortlessly carry him through. The sheer scale and importance of the project, far from intimidating him, merely inflated his ego further. He envisioned himself charming investors, making grand pronouncements, and riding on the coattails of his wife's family's prestige, effortlessly securing the necessary deals. He completely underestimated the intricate, laborious work involved. Ji Hai had meticulously designed this project to be Min Jun's undoing. The market entry strategy required extensive, verifiable research into foreign regulatory frameworks, competitor analysis, and local consumer behavior, areas where Min Jun had consistently shown a lack of thoroughness. The partnership negotiations demanded delicate diplomacy and an understanding of Mirai's core values, something Min Jun had openly disdained. And the final presentation to the board of investors. That would require a deep, demonstrable understanding of the project's financials and strategic rationale, not just superficial charm. Crucially, Ji Hai also built in fail-safes. While Min Jun would be the lead for the external-facing market entry strategy, a separate, highly competent internal team, led by Dae-hyun, would be working in parallel on the technical and product development aspects of Vision 2025. This ensured that any catastrophic failure on Min-jun's part wouldn't entirely derail the entire initiative, but his specific role was so critical and visible that his shortcomings would be undeniably exposed. He would be given ample resources, a dedicated support team, and clear objectives. There would be no room for excuses. The weeks leading up to the project deadline were fraught with quiet tension for everyone except Min-jun. Dae-hyun and his internal team worked tirelessly, their dedication a stark contrast to Min-jun's increasing aloofness. Min-jun, convinced of his own genius, spent his days making superficial calls to his wife's acquaintances, believing these networking efforts were sufficient. He barely reviewed the detailed reports submitted by his support staff, often dismissing their meticulously researched findings as overly cautious or too academic. He focused almost entirely on rehearsing his charismatic delivery for the final presentation, perfecting grand gestures and impressive-sounding but ultimately empty rhetoric. Ji-hai received regular, discreet updates from Dae-hyun and other trusted sources within the project team. She noted Min-jun's consistent avoidance of deep dives into the data, his superficial engagement with potential partners, and his utter reliance on the perceived influence of his wife's family. She knew exactly where the weak points in his strategy lay, anticipating his shortcuts with chilling accuracy. He had boasted about his disdain for pitiful details, and now those very details were being woven into an intricate trap, poised to snap shut. The stage was set, the spotlight was on Min-jun, and Ji-hai watched, a silent, unmoving presence, as the project of consequences unfolded, ready to unveil the full, bitter truth of his arrogance. The Mirai Vision 2025 market entry strategy, under Kim Min-jun's arrogant leadership, was a disaster waiting to happen. And true to Lee Ji-hai's chilling predictions, it did. The critical error, when it came, wasn't a single, isolated misstep, but the inevitable culmination of weeks of neglect, superficiality, and a profound disrespect for the detailed work required. It unfolded during a crucial preliminary meeting with a potential key partner, a formidable logistics conglomerate in Singapore, a meeting Min-jun had insisted on leading entirely himself. Dismissing the presence of Mirai's seasoned legal and financial advisors, Min-jun, radiating his usual inflated confidence, began the presentation with a flourish, relying heavily on vague pronouncements about Mirai's innovative spirit and his personal connections. However, when the Singaporean CEO, a sharp, no-nonsense businessman, began to ask pointed questions about the projected operational costs in their region, Min-jun stumbled. He had barely reviewed the financial projections, dismissing them as minor details. His answers were evasive, his figures wildly inaccurate, and his attempts to charm his way out of the situation fell flat against the partner's pragmatic scrutiny. The critical error was in his response to a question about local regulatory compliance. Min-jun, having skimmed a summary report prepared by a junior, confidently asserted that Mirai would face no significant barriers, completely overlooking a recently enacted complex data sovereignty law that would require substantial infrastructural investment and legal adaptation. His research had been superficial, his understanding non-existent. The Singaporean CEO, after a moment of stunned silence, gently corrected him, citing the specific legal clauses. The air in the room grew thick with palpable embarrassment. The immediate consequence was a sharp, audible intake of breath from Mirai's accompanying, though sidelined legal advisor, Attorney Kim, who looked utterly mortified. The Singaporean CEO's face, initially polite, hardened into a mask of professional disappointment. The meeting, which was supposed to secure a cornerstone partnership, ended abruptly, the potential partner politely but firmly stating they needed to re-evaluate Mirai's readiness. The deal, Ji-hai knew instantly from Attorney Kim's frantic call, was dead. Min-jun, initially defiant, attempting to spin the failed meeting as a minor setback and blaming the overly cautious Singaporeans, soon found his arrogance crumbling. The failure of the Singapore deal triggered a chain reaction, a domino effect that exposed every previous shortcut, every half-hearted effort. As Dae-hyun and attorney Kim began their damage control, they unearthed a cascade of unprofessionalism directly linked to Min-jun. The market analysis report from Chapter 6, which he had merely stamped his name on, was found to contain outdated information and critical gaps that would have led to disastrous strategic choices. Partnership agreements with other, smaller firms, which Min-jun had claimed were almost finalized, turned out to be based on handshake agreements with low-level contacts, lacking any formal documentation or legal review. His attempts to leverage his wife's supposed influence also backfired spectacularly. When Mireille's legal team tried to follow up on some of his connections to salvage other potential deals, they found that these contacts were either entirely unaware of Min-jun's claims or were low-ranking individuals who had no decision-making power. The illusion of his rich wife's all-encompassing power, which he had so brazenly boasted about, began to crack, revealing the emptiness beneath. Furthermore, an internal audit, quietly initiated by Ji-hae weeks prior, uncovered discrepancies in Min-jun's expense reports. He had been submitting lavish receipts for business dinners that, upon closer inspection, were clearly personal expenses, often coinciding with his wife's social events attempting to charge Mireille for his new rich life. This was not just sloppiness, it was outright fraud, an ethical breach of the highest order. His detached attitude towards his job, his belief that Mireille was merely a stepping stone, had led him to believe he could pilfer company resources without consequence. The evidence against him became overwhelming, undeniable, and self-inflicted. Each mistake, each lie, each act of professional negligence, woven together by his own hubris, created an inescapable net. Ji-hae watched from her office, receiving detailed reports, her face impassive. She felt no triumph, only a quiet, grim satisfaction that justice was unfolding as predicted. Min-jun's arrogance had not just led to a single error, it had created a systemic failure that exposed his utter unsuitability for any position of responsibility at Mirai Innovations. The incredible downfall was no longer a possibility, it was an unfolding reality. The summons arrived on Kim Min-jun's desk in a crisp white envelope, devoid of any personal touches. It simply stated, "President Lee Ji-hae requests your presence in her office at 3 p.m. today." The formal language, the stark lack of explanation, sent a shiver down Min-jun's spine. The previous week had been a blur of frantic damage control, hushed conversations, and the creeping realization that the Singapore deal, his supposed triumph, had utterly collapsed. His usual swagger had been replaced by a nervous twitch in his eye and a constant tremor in his hands. He knew, deep down, that this meeting was the culmination of his unraveling. At precisely 3 p.m., Min-jun stood before Ji-hae's office door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He adjusted his tie, attempting to recapture some semblance of his former confidence, but it felt like a flimsy mask. He knocked, and So Young, Ji-hae's assistant, gestured him inside. The office, usually a beacon of calm efficiency, felt charged with an almost palpable tension. Ji-hee sat behind her desk, her posture impeccable, her expression unreadable. She gestured to the chair opposite her, a simple, elegant piece that suddenly felt like an interrogation seat. "Min-jun-si," Ji-hae began, her voice calm, devoid of emotion, yet resonating with an undeniable authority that instantly disarmed him. "Thank you for coming." She placed a thin, meticulously organized binder on the desk. Between them, "We need to discuss your performance, specifically concerning the Mirai Vision 2025 market entry strategy and certain discrepancies that have come to light." Min-jun immediately launched into his practice defense. "President Lee, I assure you, the Singapore situation was an unfortunate misunderstanding. External factors, you see. The market is volatile, and those partners were perhaps overly cautious. My intentions were always for the best of Mirai, and I have many strong connections that can still salvage this. My wife's family—" He trailed off, his voice losing conviction under her steady, unwavering gaze. Ji-hae held up a hand, a quiet, definitive gesture that silenced him instantly. Min Junsi, this is not about external factors or unfortunate misunderstandings. This is about documented facts. She opened the binder. Let's start with the Singapore partnership. Your presentation contained critical inaccuracies regarding local regulatory compliance and projected operational costs. These were not minor oversights. They were fundamental errors that directly led to the collapse of a crucial deal. Attorney Kim's report confirms this. She slid a document across the table, a concise summary of the legal team's findings, meticulously annotated. Min Jun stammered, his face paling. But the data was provided by my team. I delegated. He tried to deflect, to blame. Ji-Hai's eyes narrowed slightly. As project lead, the ultimate responsibility for verifying that data rested with you. Furthermore, your market analysis report submitted for the Vision 2025 launch was found to be rife with outdated statistics and lacked original research, directly contradicting the requirements I personally outlined in my email to you on date. She pushed another document forward, a side-by-side comparison of his report and the true market data. The layers of his defense crumbled. He shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading on his forehead. I was under immense pressure, President Lee. My personal life, it's been demanding. He attempted to garner sympathy, to play the victim. Ji-Hai leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a low, firm tone that cut through his excuses. Your personal life is your own, Min Junsi, but it must not interfere with your professional obligations, nor should it lead to ethical breaches. She then slid the final, most damning document across the table, a detailed report from the internal audit team, highlighting his fraudulent expense claims. These are not personal demands. These are unauthorized expenditures, blatant misrepresentations of company funds for personal gain. This is a clear breach of company policy, and indeed, a matter of grave ethical concern. The amounts involved, Min Junsi, are substantial. Min Jun stared at the document, his eyes wide with dawning horror. The smugness, the bluster, the arrogance, all of it evaporated, replaced by raw panic. He looked at Ji-Hai, truly looked at her for the first time in months. Her calm, unwavering gaze, the cold authority in her voice, the meticulous evidence laid before him. He saw not the pitiful boss he had so contemptuously dismissed, but a formidable leader, a woman who had orchestrated his downfall with surgical precision, allowing him to dig his own grave with his own arrogance. Then, the words he had uttered in the executive lounge, the insults, the scorn for her and Mireille, flooded back to him. He remembered, sneering about her pathetic dedication, her naive focus on details. He remembered bragging about his rich wife, scoffing at his meager salary. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She heard me. The entire elaborate unraveling of his career, the meticulous gathering of evidence, the strategic assignment of the crucial project, it all clicked into place. This wasn't just about his failures, it was about the profound disrespect he had shown, and he had been caught. Ji-Hai watched the color drain from his face, the terror in his eyes. She didn't need to mention his boasts. The message was clear. Min Junsi, she concluded, her voice unwavering, Mireille Innovations upholds the highest standards of professionalism, integrity, and respect. Your actions have demonstrated a consistent and profound disregard for all three. The impact of your failures on the Vision 2025 project and your ethical breaches are undeniable. Effective immediately, your employment with Mireille Innovations is terminated. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ragged sound of Min Jun's breath. The trap had been laid, and he had walked into it, completely unaware, until it was too late. Kim Min Jun left Lee Ji-Hai's office a broken man. The corridors, once a pathway for his arrogant saunter, now felt like a gauntlet of silent judgment. His face, usually puffed with self-importance, was now ashen, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and profound humiliation. The sheer, overwhelming realization that his pitiful boss had meticulously orchestrated his downfall, not with an outburst of anger, but with cold, calculated efficiency, was a bitter, suffocating truth. He had, underestimated her, ridiculed her, and now he was paying the ultimate price. News of Min-jun's dismissal spread through Mirai Innovations like wildfire. Whispers, initially hushed, grew louder, fueled by the undeniable evidence of his professional failings and ethical breaches. Colleagues who had once envied his perceived wealth or tolerated his arrogance now looked at him with a mixture of pity and grim satisfaction. Choi Eun-ju and Park Jin-ho, the junior analysts who had first noted his new luxury car, exchanged knowing glances. "I guess his connections couldn't save him after all," Jin-ho remarked, a subtle note of vindication in his voice. The carefully cultivated image of the rich man's husband shattered into 1,000 pieces. His dismissal was swift and uncompromising. His access badges were deactivated, his company laptop confiscated, and he was escorted out of the building with a small box of personal effects, leaving behind a decade of his professional life. His reputation, once merely unremarkable, was now irrevocably tainted. In the tight-knit world of Korean corporate circles, news of such a public and definitive termination from a prestigious company like Mirai Innovations would precede him, making future employment in any reputable firm a near impossibility. He was not just unemployed, he was professionally ruined, a pariah in the very industry he had so casually disdained. But the humiliation didn't end there. The internal audit's findings regarding his fraudulent expense claims quickly leaked, either through disgruntled colleagues or the sheer force of corporate gossip. The revelations painted a picture of a man who not only neglected his duties, but actively stole from the company he served. The irony was devastating. He had boasted of his wife's billions, yet resorted to petty theft from his meager corporate salary, betraying a profound hypocrisy. Then came the final crushing blow, the truth about his rich wife's wealth. The discreet background check commissioned by Ji-hai, now confirmed and openly discussed, revealed the true nature of Hwang Do-yeon's family fortune. While substantial, it was tightly controlled by her patriarch, and Min-jun had no direct access to it. His lavish lifestyle had been entirely dependent on his wife's goodwill, a goodwill that, in the face of his public disgrace and the potential damage to her family's reputation, quickly evaporated. Reports, hushed at first, then open, indicated a swift and decisive separation. Do-yeon, a woman of her own standing, was not about to let Min-jun's arrogance and public scandal reflect poorly on the Hwang Group. The rich wife, who was supposed to be his ticket to a life of leisure, became the instrument of his complete isolation. He was left with nothing but the bitter taste of his own arrogance. His job was gone, his reputation in tatters, his wealthy connections severed, and his marriage, the very foundation of his inflated ego, dissolved. The pitiful boss he had scoffed at, the one who cared about spreadsheets and meetings, had systematically dismantled his entire world, not with a single dramatic act, but through the unwavering application of the very principles he had mocked: integrity, diligence, and accountability. In the aftermath, a quiet but powerful lesson resonated throughout Mirai Innovations. Lee Ji-hai's actions, though stern, reinforced the core values of the company. It was a stark reminder that humility, respect, and unwavering dedication were not just corporate slogans but essential pillars of success. Hard work was recognized, integrity was non-negotiable, and arrogance, no matter its perceived source, would not be tolerated. The company, having purged its corrosive element, hummed with renewed purpose, its foundations stronger than ever. Ji-hae, back in her corner office, looked out at the city. She felt no sense of triumph, no gloating satisfaction, only a quiet, resolute calm. Her decision had been difficult but necessary. Min-jun's downfall was not a personal vendetta. It was a testament to the immutable laws of cause and effect, a powerful lesson in the devastating consequences of unchecked hubris. He had boasted about his new rich wife, unaware his boss was listening, and in that moment of casual contempt, he had unwittingly written the first chapter of his own incredible downfall. A week had passed since Kim Min-jun's unceremonious departure, and a subtle yet profound shift had settled over Mirai Innovations. The air, once intermittently thick with the unspoken tension of Min Jun's growing arrogance, now felt lighter, cleaner, as if a window had finally been opened to let in a refreshing breeze. Lee Ji-hee, in her quiet corner office, felt this change acutely. She sat at her desk, the familiar green tea steaming beside her, but her gaze, usually fixed on documents, often drifted towards the panoramic cityscape, reflecting on the intricate dance of events that had just concluded. There was no triumph in her heart, no sense of personal victory, merely a quiet, resolute calm. The burden of leadership, she knew, was not found in celebrating the downfall of an employee, but in the difficult, often solitary decisions required to safeguard the integrity and future of the entire enterprise. Min Jun's dismissal had been a surgical necessity, a painful but vital excision of a cancerous cell before it could metastasize and corrupt the healthy body of Mirai. She recalled his sneering words in the executive lounge. Pitiful, pathetic, naive. Those words, once a searing insult, now merely underscored the depth of his delusion, a stark contrast to the quiet strength she had drawn upon to orchestrate his undoing. She thought of the early days of Mirai, built on sleepless nights, unwavering dedication, and the collective belief that hard work and mutual respect were the true currencies of success. Min Jun had scoffed at these very foundations, seeing them as quaint relics of a bygone era, easily circumvented by inherited wealth and a performative facade. His hubris had been a slow-acting poison, eroding morale, fostering cynicism, and challenging the very ethos she had painstakingly cultivated. His downfall, therefore, was not merely a consequence for him, but a powerful, albeit harsh, reaffirmation of Mirai's core values for everyone else. In the days following his termination, Ji-hai had observed the company's pulse closely. The initial shock among employees had quickly given way to a palpable sense of relief. Discussions around the water cooler, once cautious and laden with thinly veiled complaints about Min Jun, now buzzed with renewed energy and purpose. Colleagues spoke openly of the increased efficiency in the marketing department, the smoother workflow, and the absence of the oppressive atmosphere Min Jun had created. Kang Dae-hyun, Min Jun's former team lead, looked noticeably less stressed, his shoulders having shed an invisible weight. He approached Ji-hai one afternoon, a rare smile on his face. "President Lee," he began, his voice earnest, "the team's morale has dramatically improved. We're already making up for lost time on the Vision 2025 project. Thank you." His gratitude, unspoken but clear, was for the decisive action taken for restoring the balance. Ji-hai understood that such an event, if not handled with clarity and purpose, could breed fear. Her task now was to ensure it bred understanding and strengthened resolve. She convened a company-wide town hall meeting, not to address Min Jun directly, but to articulate Mirai's path forward. She spoke of the importance of the Vision 2025 initiative, emphasizing the collective effort required. Mirai Innovations thrives on innovation. Yes, she had stated, her voice projecting across the auditorium with calm authority. But our true strength lies in our integrity, our unwavering dedication to excellence, and the profound respect we hold for one another's contributions. Every single role, from the newest intern to the executive board, is vital. We are a collective, and our success is a shared journey, built on trust and diligent effort. She made no mention of Min Jun, but the message was clear, resonating deeply with every employee present. It was a reaffirmation that hard work mattered, that honesty was paramount, and that the company stood firmly behind its core values. Subtly, she initiated new internal programs designed to reinforce positive behaviors. A peer recognition award was launched, encouraging employees to nominate colleagues who exemplified Mirai's values of collaboration, diligence, and ethical conduct. Mentorship programs were expanded, fostering a culture of support and growth rather than cutthroat competition. Ji-hai ensured that the narrative around Min Jun's departure, though never explicitly stated by her, was one of upholding standards, not personal vendetta. It was about preserving the health of the entire ecosystem. She knew that Min Jun's story would become a cautionary tale within Mirai, whispered in hushed tones but understood by all. It was a stark reminder that true influence and respect were earned through consistent effort and unimpeachable character, not through inherited wealth or inflated ego. His boast about his rich wife and his disdain for the meager salary at Mire had crumbled under the weight of his own professional negligence and ethical lapses. The illusion of grandeur, built on borrowed prestige, had proven fragile, leaving him with nothing. The experience had also deepened Jihai's own understanding of leadership. It wasn't just about vision or strategy. It was about stewardship, about nurturing a culture where every individual felt valued, but also held accountable. It was about having the courage to make tough decisions, not out of anger, but out of a profound commitment to the greater good of the organization. The pitiful boss had demonstrated a quiet, formidable power that surpassed any superficial display of wealth or arrogance. As the days turned into weeks, Mirai Innovations not only recovered, but thrived. The Vision 2025 project, with Dae-hyun now firmly at the helm of the market entry strategy, was back on track, progressing, with renewed vigor and meticulous attention to detail. New partnerships were being forged, built on mutual trust and thoroughly vetted agreements. The company's reputation, briefly shadowed by Min Jun's antics, now shone brighter, burnished by the clear demonstration of its unwavering commitment to integrity. Jihai took a final sip of her tea, now cool. The sun was setting, painting the Seoul skyline in hues of orange and purple. The hum of Mirai Innovations below her office was a steady, harmonious sound, a testament to the collective dedication of its people. Min Jun's incredible downfall was a powerful, unforgettable lesson, not just for him, but for everyone who witnessed it. It was a testament to the quiet strength of true leadership, the enduring power of integrity, and the bitter, inevitable fate of unchecked hubris. Mirai Innovations, stronger and more unified than ever, stood as a beacon of these principles, ready to face the future, its foundations restored and its purpose reaffirmed.